Got late. This is chapter 13. I never saw her cry. 8 days missing, June 11th, 2010. Wearing matching white t-shirts bearing the image of Chiron standing in front of his science exhibit and flanked by a larger-than-life-size blow-up of the same picture, the four parents appeared before the media for the first time. Standing at the chancel in Brooks Hill Church across from the street from Skyline Elementary, Tony spoke for the group. The police had asked him to. He wasn't quite sure why he had been selected and would later describe it as being pushed out in front. Kane would say a few words after Tony, but Tony would be the first family member to address the local and national media. The news conference was broadcast live. It was Friday, June 11th, and Chiron had been missing 1 week. The police helped Tony draft a statement. He went off by himself for a while and to prepare mentally. He needed to be alone to think about how to get through the few minutes and to keep his emotions in check. His friend Terry Newell, the Medford detective who had been with him the day that they had learned Chiron was missing, was at his side. Tony researched a little, then put the statement away until it was time to speak. Desiree felt sick as they entered the church. Her knees were weak, and she thought she was going to throw up. But she took her place standing with Tony, Terry, and Kane. She was angry, and she wasn't going to be permitted to speak. Mary Lindstrand, the MCSO spokesperson, and Captain Mike Schultz had brought the parents to the church and stood nearby during the news conference. There was dozens of TV cameras and reporters. Kane's mother and stepfather had arrived from Seattle and were present. Sorry. Bumping. Is that better? I don't know. There were dozens of TV cameras and reporters. Kane's mother and stepmother had arrived from Seattle and were present. So were Tony's brother Jeff and Desiree's sister Kelly. Schultz spoke first and cautioned the media that the parents would not be answering questions. He invited reporters to submit questions to the police, who would share them with the family. Those questions would be answered by the next news briefing. Schultz told the media that the parents that stand today as a family. Schultz told the media that the parents stand here today as a family. In truth, the family was a shaky one, more troubled than the police knew. There was a moment when Schultz made an awkward choice of words. "This is going to be a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to be warm," he said. What he meant and went on to explain was that as the families were outside enjoying the late spring weather, they should keep their eyes and ears focused on helping to find Chiron. As Tony stepped forward in the church, he could hear helicopters flying over. The search had expanded to Sauvie Island and its thousands of acres in marsh, rivers, and isolated trails. Terry leaned on Kane while the Schultz spoke and appeared to be crying. But when Tony stepped forward to speak, she moved over to Desiree. As Tony spoke, TV stations and network played videos of the search for Chiron on a split screen. "I'd like to say, Chiron, we miss you, we love you, and we need you home right now. We're doing everything we can to work with law enforcement and search and rescue crews to make sure that you get back to us as soon as possible." As Tony continued, Terry leaned her head on Desiree's chest and put her arm around her shoulder. It was difficult to tell if Terry was comforting Desiree, looking for comfort, or playing a role for the cameras. "We want to say how much we appreciate the outpouring of love and the support of prayer and thoughts as we wait for you. Your school friends and their families, the teachers and the staff at your school, and the community as a whole have shown how much impact one little boy's smile can have on a community. You mean everything to us, and until you come home, this family is not complete. Desiree remained rigid in response to Terry's overtures. The thing that was weird, Desiree said later, is that Terry wouldn't even touch me at all. At that point, we had never even hugged, ever. It was the most bizarre experience, and all of our time as co-parents, I never hid my feelings from her. In fact, when Terry phoned one time to complain or to confide in her, Desiree told her, "We will never be friends. We will never go get coffee, so I don't know why you're even telling me about this right now." As Desiree tolerated Terry's nearness at the news conference, she repeated the mantra to herself. "I'm doing this for you, Chiron. Chiron, I love you. I'm doing this for you, Chiron. Chiron, I love you." When Tony was done speaking, Desiree tried to separate herself from Terry. "I wanted Tony to stand in between us, but he didn't. You see her standing there and her arms funny and awkward while Kane is talking. I didn't care. I wanted her uncomfortable. She was lucky that I was a good person on that day." Tony introduced Kane. As they traded places, the two men shared a long hug, Kane gripping and holding fast to Tony. Tony had addressed his comments to Chiron. Kane spoke to the public and the media. "We want to thank the community, the parents of the children, the bus drivers, and all of those who are being interviewed multiple times to try to help and find Chiron. Thank you. We as the family know how difficult and stressful this is, but your memories and statements can help us find Chiron. We'll never be able to thank you enough for that help. Finally, we would like to thank the media. If it was not for you showing Chiron on every newscast, printing his story in the papers, his face would not be known to everyone. People from around this nation have seen his picture. This helps tremendously. Please help us bring Chiron home." After Tony and Kane spoke, detectives displayed clothing that matched what Chiron had been wearing on June 4th. They wanted it to be photographed to prompt the memories of people who might have seen the boy. It was sad to see a CSI t-shirt like the one he had been wearing, gray pants, and black Skechers laid out. The detectives also displayed a pair of wired glasses similar to the frames Chiron wore. As they were leaving, Desiree told Tony to get Terry away from her. Mary Lindstrom made eye contact with Desiree and shot her a look that said that she had understood. Lindstrom ushered Kane and Terry out the back door of the church first. "We walked down the stairs from the back of the church and out the side of the church where the van was waiting," Desiree explained. "I could see Terry didn't like that I had snubbed her, and she kept trying to talk to me. We all got in the van, and then the detective Bobby O'Donnell and Gray Vinning came up and opened the van door and asked Terry and Kane to come with them. I remember the police saying that they had just wanted to ask them a couple of questions again. The police were taking Terry for a second polygraph exam. She had been told that she had failed the first one. I remember the look on Terry's face when she realized that she was supposed to go with Bob. She was pissed, and I think even asked for another detective, Will Huffman, to which Bob replied, no. She didn't like Bob because he was direct with her, playing the bad cop role. Desiree had seen Terry flirting with Will. They should have sent him that day, Desiree said. I believe that was their last chance to get anything out of her. Eventually, Desiree heard about how universal the reaction was to Terry's behavior on the TV, and she saw it for herself. It was odd. It almost seemed like she was enjoying my pain or something. Desiree knew it looked like Terry was suffering. Except she wasn't. She was pretending to sniffle through her nose to sound like she was crying, Desiree said later. But I never saw her cry. Not once in the 4 weeks we were around each other after Chiron went missing. Tony had been trying to keep an open mind about Terry. He relied on his detective training to wait and see where the facts led. There was not a lot to base this on, he said, referring to Desiree's early conclusion that Terry was responsible for her son's disappearance. But soon, Tony agreed. We were solid on her within a couple of weeks. One of the reasons was Terry's odd behavior at the news conference. Desiree felt Terry was watching them to try to mirror their emotions. She acted very strange, Tony said. She behaved like a suspect and talked like a suspect. Terry's only comment about the news conference was an observation about the number of cameras present and how much attention the parents had received. Kane, Tony, and Desiree weren't looking for attention from the media. They had wanted to keep the attention kept on Chiron. In the morning, on the way to the press conference, law enforcement officers drove the parents by the school and sites where they were being searched. Desiree had her eyes glued on places they were passing. "What are you looking at?" Terry asked her. "I'm looking for my son," Desiree said. "Like you'll find him that way," Terry told her. Most of the media coverage was focused on the Portland area. It was where Chiron lived, where he went to school, and where he disappeared. Desiree wanted to remind people that Chiron had strong ties to Medford and spent as much time there as he did in Portland. Desiree's sister Kelly and their brother Sean were interviewed by the Medford media. The MCSO was not happy and saw Sean as a little too eager to be part of the case. Desiree had asked him not to speak again with the media. That created some hard feelings between sister and brother. Kelly and her father returned to Portland in time to attend the news conference. Kelly was watching Terry carefully in person and on TV. Terry was so different than at the house, Kelly said. At the house, she wasn't crying, and she was acting like she was throwing a party. Then, suddenly, she is emotional. Later that day, police brought Terry back to Kane's house. She was fuming. She complained to everyone present, including Desiree, Tony, and the embedded detectives about the polygraph exam. "I've had it," she told Kane. "I'm done cooperating. I can't believe they're focusing on me." Terry had walked out on the polygraph, not completing it. Desiree was growing even more suspicious of Terry. She couldn't see what was so complicated about taking a polygraph. Hers had lasted a couple of hours and revolved around 3 questions. Do you know where Chiron Horman is? Were you with Chiron Horman after 8:45 a.m. on June 4th? Do you have any direct involvement or any indirect knowledge of Chiron Horman's kidnapping? And then the first question was repeated. Do you know where Chiron Horman is? So what was the big deal? It was a local story that quickly became bigger. Portland television stations shared their video with their respective networks and other affiliates, including television stations in Medford, Desiree's hometown, and Roseburg, Terry's hometown. Newsworks sent their own reporters. A freelance writer for People arrived in Portland. Because of the internet, newspapers and websites around the world didn't have to send their own reporters. They could rely on others. Sometimes misinformation was shared and became a part of the record and embedded in the public's memory, even if it was inaccurate. Desiree's friend and coworker, Amanda Loki, arrived in Portland. She had watched the news conference from her home in Medford. Like Desiree, Amanda had a child living with her father in the Portland area. Her halfway point in the "you do what you gotta do to see your child" routine was Cottage Grove, just south of Desiree's handoff stop at Cherry's Cafes and Pies. Amanda went to the hotel where Desiree and Tony were staying. The news was on the television in the room. Terry Newell and Justin Ivins kept Tony's company, while Amanda and Desiree took a walk out to the hotel's courtyard. We weren't super close until Chiron went missing. I don't know if she had a girlfriend to talk to, Amanda said. Amanda knew nothing of Desiree's feelings about Terry. Desiree asked me if I had seen the news conference and what she thought about Terry's demeanor. I said, well, it is chilling. It's very suspicious. After Amanda returned to Medford, she became obsessed with Chiron's disappearance. She read everything about the case, watched all the television coverage, and scoured the internet. I lost my focus on my own family. My husband had to rein me back in. I realized I could be a friend to Desiree, but be careful about my obsession. I didn't watch the news as much. Detective Lee Gosage visited Desiree and Tony at their hotel. At exactly the same moment, a second detective went to Kane's house. The parents were informed that the case was now a criminal investigation. Gosan told Desiree and Tony that the likelihood that Chiron was alive was quite slim. He sounded discouraged about the search. Desiree was stunned. She had never thought that Chiron wouldn't be found. She assumed he would be found the first night. Even as the wife of a detective and a frequent viewer of TV crime shows, she'd assumed that in real life, missing children are found. She had assumed that she and Tony would arrive in Portland and that she would join the searchers and that they would find Chiron. Even after her epiphany on the Sunday after Chiron disappeared, when she felt Chiron was letting her know that he was gone, she had continued to believe that he would be found. I have watched too much TV and crime dramas where a crime is wrapped up and solved in 60 minutes, she said. It's nothing like TV. I couldn't show up and help search. They wouldn't find him right away. They wouldn't make an immediate arrest. None of what I thought happens in real life. I thought that they would figure out who took him and that they would arrest that person. Sometimes that doesn't happen in real life. She began to doubt herself. She had felt for days that Terry had taken Chiron somewhere. She wanted Tony to tell her everything was going to be okay, but he couldn't. She felt that she was alone in thinking Terry was involved. I wanted the police to tell me who they thought it was. I wanted reassurance that it wasn't a pedophile or a stranger abduction. All the team could tell me is that they had ruled out all registered sex offenders and pedophiles in the area, about 36. As she was briefed about the change in the case, Desiree cried. She also felt relieved. Even with the bad news the detective had delivered, Desiree understood that the police had come to the same conclusion she had. Chiron did not walk out of school to look for a frog. He did not leave with a stranger. He was taken by someone who blended in, who walked among the crowd that morning because they belonged there. Reality weirdly replicated Chiron's science exhibit. He was the tree frog in danger from a predator. He didn't know there was a threat, but he was caught before he could escape. As Chiron's disappearance became a criminal investigation, Tony and Terry Newell had two concerns. If the MCSO was convinced Chiron was dead, they would no longer be searching for Chiron, who would still be alive. And if they decided to focus on Terry, they would stop looking at other suspects. Tony believed he was protecting Desiree by not letting her read the news or watch TV coverage of the search for Chiron. But Desiree had to know that the MCSO and the FBI were taking Chiron's case seriously, and the only way to gauge that was by how much coverage it received. It was a lot. This is chapter 14. Lord, why are you not striking her dead yet? 10 days missing. The morning of June 13th, 2010. As Tony had cautioned, there would be no secrets now. With no solid news about the missing boy, the media focused on the messy relationships that the police could not keep private. There was a fierce competition to find something new to report every day. All Desiree wanted was to be heard, for reporters to be kind, and for the focus to be on Chiron. What the reporters wanted was news of Chiron's family, especially as details emerged about the spouses and ex-spouses. It's what the Oregonian wanted, what People magazine wanted, and what the network TV shows wanted, and what Portland's alternative newspaper, the Willamette Week, wanted. The cities of the Pacific Northwest are young. Portland, settled in 1843. Yeah, true story. Was the major part of the Northwest until the railroad connected Seattle, settling in 1851 with its points east. The The Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 cemented Seattle's prosperity. Anyone heading to Alaska bought their gear in Seattle. San Francisco is much older, settled by the Spanish in 1769. All three cities, constructed of wood, had to be rebuilt after devastating fires. Portland and Seattle in the 1880s, and San Francisco after a devastating fire accompanied the 1906 earthquake. In the 21st century, the New York Times dubbed Portland the capital of West Coast urban cool. In 2011, it would be newly famous thanks to a satirical television show called Portlandia, and one of its jokes, "Portland is where young people go to retire. Fun city, but a bleak labor market, hence all the slackers parked in coffee shops around the clock." In truth, numbers of YCESs, or young college educated have migrated to Seattle and Portland. Both cities are home to a disproportionate wealth thanks to the tech industry and to a disproportionate homelessness. Another milestone Portland doesn't publicize is the whitest city in America, or depending on the year, one of them, due to the racist laws in place before statehood in 1859. Portland, the 22nd largest television market in the country, with 1.8 million homes, had long established TV and radio stations. There were the affiliates of CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, and Fox, as well as several independent stations. The radio stations with good news departments, a robust two-newspaper town, had shrunk to one when the Oregon Journal, which never recovered from a strike in 1959, ceased publishing in 1982. That left the Oregonian, founded in 1850 and published daily since 1861. The internet had begun to make, like other newspapers in America, obsolete. The internet had begun to make it, like other newspapers in America, obsolete. The Oregonian eventually went from a broadcast to a tabloid size, but in 2010 it was still a broadsheet with a website. Most of the coverage of Chiron Horman's story was shared between several reporters. In 2010, the staff was smaller than ever. The newspaper had missed an important breaking stories in recent years, and its reputation had been damaged. Circulation was dropping. To cut costs, the paper cut a 7-day-a-week delivery, moved out of a building that had been its downtown home for decades, and announced huge layoffs. The Oregonian had long employed talent, but too many veteran reporters were forced to retire or were laid off. Although reporter Lynn Terry and Maxine Bernstein wrote credible stories, the newspaper did not endear itself to Desiree with some of its coverage. Turning to friends of Terry's who told stories about how Terry Moulton was Chiron's mother in all the important ways, not Desiree. A weekend newspaper in Portland that usually kept tabs on the city and county government and high-profile scandals, the Willamette Weekly, had won their Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting in 2005 for a story about a former mayor, Neil Goldschmidt's sexual misconduct with the 14-year-old babysitter 13 years earlier. Goldschmidt, who had also been the governor of Oregon and President Carter's U.S. Secretary of Transportation, resigned from the many boards he was on, including the state boards of higher education. His portrait was removed from the walls of the state capitol and put into storage. Willamette Week, like the other media, wrote more about Chiron's parents and step-parents than about the actual search. Ideally, one reporter for each news newspaper or TV station would be assigned to cover a story in order to establish a rapport with the police and the family and to have a familiarity. I don't know. To have a familiarity. Bruh. With the case. In reality, reporters come and go to accommodate coverage of an ongoing story. From the beginning, one journalist, Kyle Iboshi, a reporter for KGW-TV, Portland's NBC affiliate, had Desiree's trust. A native Oregonian, Japanese American, and the father of 3 young sons, he reported on Chiron from start and stayed with the story. Iboshi joined KGW in 2000 after working his way up in smaller markets in Nevada and Oregon. On June 4, 2010, he was on his way home from covering a story when he got a call from his wife. Portland Public Schools had put out an alert to hundreds of thousands of students' homes that a young boy was missing from his school. He turned around and drive to Skyline Elementary. Since Desiree, Tony, and Kane and Terry were off limits to the media, reporters passed on questions to the police, who in turn got answers from the parents. What is Chiron like? What is his standout attributes? Desiree wrote, he has a very shy and quiet, affectionate personality, demonstrating warmth and enthusiasm for the people and activities he loves. Some of the things that he enjoys are playing with his Hot Wheel cars, fishing, his artwork, playing with his cat Bootsy and Ernie, Tony's dog, and he loves to go on trips where he gets to fly on airplanes. Chiron easily makes friends with other kids his age. He has a belly laugh that is infectious when you hear it, and you can't help but to laugh too. He is quick-witted and can make any situation funny. He looks up to his big brother. They dance and they rock out in the living room. Chiron is the type of kid that can play by himself for hours or quickly become the center of attention with his family. What does Chiron want to be when he grows up? A police detective and investigator. Was Chiron in a good mood the morning he disappeared? He was very excited about his red-eyed tree frog diorama and poster board that he and his dad had been working on. Chiron was very proud of the project because he had done a lot of the diorama himself. What was Chiron looking forward to doing this summer? Chiron is looking forward to going to his annual family trips. He is going to California to spend time with his friends and a trip to Seaside for his birthday, a houseboat trip on Shasta Lake in August, and a Hellgate jet boat excursion in July. He got a new fishing pole for Christmas that he has been practicing with in the backyard, so that he has been looking forward to that for many camping and fishing trips. Desiree was hoping the media had picked up on the fact that she thought of what she thought of Chiron and spoke of her son only in the present tense. He is looking forward to family trips. When she was scheduled to have Quinn, she continued to say, I have the boys. She had 2 sons. No one was going to tell her that she didn't. On Sunday, Amanda drove Desiree and Kelly to Kane's house. She helped Desiree distribute flyers with Chiron's photo and details about how to contact the police. Later, there was a briefing for the families and friends. Chairs were set up under a tent. Amanda met Terry, who stared at her during the briefing. It was eerie. I felt her looking at me a lot. You get a vibe from someone. When the police told the group that the reward had been increased to $25,000, Terry began crying. She started to sob, Amanda said. It seemed odd. Police asked her why she was crying. She said because Chiron was worth more than that. Everyone was at the briefing. The MCSO, state police, and FBI. When the MCSO announced that Kane, Desiree, and Tony had been told that the search was being scaled back, Terry acted sad. Her head was bowed, somber. It was as if she thought to herself, "I have to act sad now," Tony said. Amanda noticed that Kane and Terry never held hands or consoled each other. She never saw Terry interact with Kira. That weekend, the Oregonian published a story critical of the sheriff's office response on June 4th. A reporter interviewed Clint Van Zant, a former FBI profiler, Virginia-based security consultant, who said that because Skyline Elementary didn't notify the parents when Chiron was found absent, the investigation began 8 to 12 hours after it should have. He said emergency dispatchers gave Chiron's missing a low priority. He said trained searchers first gathered at the sheriff's headquarters in Northeast Portland, then fought Friday rush hour traffic to get to Northwest Portland, further delaying the start of the investigation. It was the first of the many times that the reporters would turn to a retired or former members of the police or talking heads for a soundbite. Desiree and Tony knew much of the story wasn't true. The search began as soon as everyone knew Chiron was missing, which was 6 hours after attendance was taken. Chiron's case was not given low priority. They saw it for themselves when they arrived in Portland the evening of June 4th and observed the huge police presence. The story quoted information from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the NCMEC. According to a 2008 report, 115 children on average are abducted by strangers or an acquaintance each year. Most are found within hours, but 1/4 of abducted children are killed, and 76% of those children die within 3 hours after being kidnapped. Whatever happened to this little boy, by the time the authorities really geared up, they were 12 hours behind the power curve, Van Zant said. That is a long time to be behind in a case like this. The story criticized the police and was itself criticized. Cindy Banks, who owned the building where the MCSO was housed, told the Oregonian that she had seen searchers pulling long hours even on their days off. "We don't tolerate criticism of law enforcement," she said. Searchers took the hunt for Chiron personally and worked until, as Sheriff Staton said later, they were emotionally drained and exhausted. But there was no disputing the fact that a confluence of circumstances worked in the favor of the person who had taken Chiron. Desiree learned that the MCSO had CART training and how important it was. CART training, Child Abduction Response Team training, is specialized training that prepares police to search for a missing child. Although Chiron was missing for several hours before it was known, the CART training probably helped bring the MCSO up to speed. Detectives determined that the school was the primary crime scene. Kane's house was the secondary crime scene, which meant both places were searched repeatedly. Because the school had several tunnels under it, the police used an old floor plans and ground penetrating radar, or GPR, in their search. They used FLIR, thermal imaging infrared cameras, to search at night. The MCSO embedded 2 investigators with the family 24 hours a day for 2 weeks. There was a dedicated public information officer to coordinate with the media. MCSO asked for help. Law enforcement agencies from all over the West Coast have responded. With the distraction of the briefings and the house full of people, Desiree took Amanda by the arm and the two snuck into Chiron's room. For days, Desiree had not slept, eaten, or stopped crying over her missing son. Quietly using her phone, she took photos of Chiron's room. If Terry had her way, Desiree would never be alone in the room again. This might be Desiree's last chance to document his room. The model he made for his school project on Portland's 90-year-old iron bridge was on the desk. She took a few pictures of it. Blue paper stood in for the Willamette River as it flowed under the mock-up of the bridge. There were 2 boats traveling under it. A greenway ran alongside each side of the bridge. Everywhere in the room, Desiree saw signs of how busy Chiron had been that spring. There were school trips to the Oregon Museum in Science and Industry, and to a pumpkin patch and a strawberry farm. There was a school play about the settling of Portland. Impulsively, Desiree picked up 2 items, the brochure from the science fair that Chiron had scribbled on the morning of June 4th, and a shirt. It was a t-shirt with the logo for an event Chiron had participated in, a Heart Association event for kids called Jump Rope for Heart. It was a pile of unfolded laundry on Chiron's bed. Desiree knew that there were rules for this kind of things. The police wanted everything kept as it was, but she hid the items under her shirt and left the room. The parents stood together in the church, and it was the second time and the last time. On June 13th, Sheriff Stanton clarified that the ground search was ending and rescue teams from the outside of Portland would be sent home. But he denied that he was downsizing the investigation. He thanked the more than 1,300 trained searchers from Oregon, Washington, and California that they had taken a part in the hunt for Chiron. He also thanked the 42 different law enforcement agencies and more than 200 detectives involved in the case. Captain Jason Gates told reporters that the case was now a criminal matter and that the MCSO was ending regularly scheduled news conferences. He made a promise with the parents and the media. This will not become a cold case for us. We will continue to investigate this case until we have it solved. Detectives planned to interview Skyline students, parents, and staff again, and to continue canvassing the neighborhood. Residents were encouraged to keep calling in tips. Gates said no detail was too small. The sheriff's office had other announcements. It was looking for video footage of traffic on several roads in the general area of the school. As the MCSO had told the family, the reward for information would increase to $25,000 finally after 100 t-shirts with an image of Chiron's missing poster would be distributed. The reward for information would increase to $25,000 finally after 100 t-shirts with an image of Chiron's missing poster would be distributed. The parents and step-parents did not speak. Sheriff Stanton told the news media that he had spent a lot of time with the families and that they had understood that there was support of change in focus. Desiree had deja vu. They were standing in the church again. Terry was clutching at her again. Twice we had stood in that church, the 4 of us. Twice I had high expectations, she said later. I remember being disappointed in God because I expected him to strike Terry down right there in church for lying, pretending to cry, pretending to be dedicated to Chiron, pretending about it all. Terry was not struck down. Although the MCSO said the land search was over, divers were seen wading and diving in ponds, marshes, and tributaries on Sauvie Island while the National Guard helicopter flew overhead. Desiree said later that search dogs alerted on something. All right, we are on page 141. Also, on another unrelated note, it is my birthday. And I actually chose to start reading this book again, primarily because I missed learning about Chiron. And, yeah. All right. Well, have a good day. Bye.